Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership podcast with ID3 for Isaiah Drone III. This show was designed to provide an exclusive forum on educational achievement gaps related to learner success while discovering relationships and family issues in a diverse setting. All right, this is another night of the Impact of Educational Leadership. This is episode 46. I'm your host, ID3 for Isaiah Drone III. Tonight's panelists are Buddy Thornton, Lisa Wilcrout, and Rick Beaule. Ladies and gentlemen, please say hello to the people.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
Well, tonight's topic is cyberbullying toolkits for the digital age. Currently, studies show that half of workplace bullying and 40% of school bullying will go unreported. Cyberbullying is becoming an epidemic in America, and social media has helped catapult it to an astronomical level where parents, educators, and those in a position to help simply don't know what to do. According to a report from the CDC, Center for Disease and Control, 1 out of 12 teens have attempted suicide, and 1 in 6 high school students have seriously considered it. Young people, especially those living in poverty, often bring with them to school multiple barriers, impeding their learning and development. Tonight, we will have a discussion to address cyberbullying toolkits for the digital age. My first panelist tonight is Buddy, the positive social change agent pro. Buddy, please say hello to the people.
Good evening, everybody.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Buddy Thornton. Bachelor's of Science in Allied Health Sciences, University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. Master's in Human Services Counseling and Executive Leadership, Liberty University. Doctoral learner, completing his dissertation at Grand Canyon University. Branding as the Positive Social Change Agent Pro through effective coaching and mentoring. Focus on education and family dynamics. He is also the proud board member of Parent File and board member of Brokenness to Healing Foundation. We are so enthralled to have him here with us this evening. Okay, with that being said, my question for you, Buddy, is how can we teach students to be more resilient moving forward into the digital age?
Isaiah, that's an excellent question. First, before I even try to answer it, I want to speak for the entire panel in saying that there is zero socially redeeming value in any form of bullying, whether it be cyber, in person, in business, in the home. Bullying has zero value, and it is one of the most detrimental things in our society today. Resilience actually comes from an intrinsic belief that you have value. Teachers, parents have to really reach inside and find out what makes each child tick and understand that the most important thing they can impart to them is a sense of self-confidence, self-esteem. Take steps to build maturity. And popularity is highly overrated. What kids need to understand today is they need to understand that it has to be about themselves first. I know it's a little antithetical sometimes. It makes it a little difficult when you're trying to teach in a large environment where you've got a lot of kids. But you have the extroverts, you have the introverts, and then you have those who are just, they're naturally become victims because they have not had any sense of self-confidence. They have not had any sense of self-esteem. They have not been given opportunities to build that. In my one teaching presentation that I give to teachers, administrators, and to students on my life, my voice, my dreams, my choice, I try to teach them that they have to build their life from the bottom up. And they have to find their voice. What excites them? What makes them happy? And if they can get a grasp on that, they can start building self-confidence and self-esteem. And then they can start searching out what their feelers and find out what they're passionate about, and then they can externalize and get a support system built around them, but it still revolves back to themselves. They have to be motivated to move through and achieve their dreams. And to do that, without self-confidence or self-esteem, it's virtually impossible. When you add the bullying dynamic to that, now you've got a kid who, as soon as they're bullied, they lose all sense of neural connection. They drop down into the fight, flight, or freeze component, and they really can't respond in any way other than what they have seen. They know from prior experience, from the role models in their lives, what a bully is, and to fear them. And so that's where they are. So the number one thing teachers, parents can do is they can elevate them away from the bullying dynamic, get them back out of their amygdala response, and get them up into thinking. And the best way to do that is let's build a pre-program of how to identify bullying and how to build resilience in each kid, how to give them that self-confidence. It's a tough conversation. Kids have to make tough choices. Are you going to be fearful, or are you going to build yourself a resiliency toolkit by building self-esteem and self-confidence so that when the bullying comes at you, you already have the tools to believe you have self-worth and you can get through it? And that's probably the best resiliency tool we have. Build it before it happens.
You know, Buddy, Positive Social Change Agent Pro, that was absolutely wonderful. That was a wonderful response. I love the way you talked about programs to build and develop resiliency and self-confidence and those support systems that are so needed. You know, a lot of times people, they don't even know why people cyberbully other people in the first place. I mean, whether they may think that it's funny, right? They don't, and then educators sometimes don't even think it's a big deal, right? And then some people say that bullying was encouraged by their friends, right, in their circles or whatever. And so, you know, some people don't even know what cyberbullying is at all, right? In most cases, cyberbullies don't get caught. They don't get caught, and because they don't believe that is important. And then there are different factors, like you said, that cause people to do different things, right? Whether it's microaggression, right? And these are triggers that may trigger someone to be envious or jealous or whatever the case. So I like the way you talked about how to escape those problems. How to escape those problems. That's a key in hunting for the good stuff, and that's pretty much, you know, what you do as a positive social change agent. You show people, you teach people, you guide people how to hunt, if you will, for the good stuff. So I love the response, and I want to direct my next question to Lisa Wilcrout. I believe that would be perfect. Lisa, how are you doing this evening?
I am doing very well. How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. Let me tell you a little bit about Lisa Wilcrout, a graduate of Purdue University with a master's degree in educational administration and a bachelor's degree in education. She has experience as an independent consultant since 2006, teaching grades K through 12, and as an educational administrator. Throughout her career, she enhanced learning outcomes, the professional development of staff members, and positive communications with communities. Lisa, with that being said, my question for you is, what are some tools that educators can use to keep track of changes in students' behavior?
Isaiah, I'm going to talk through 5 ways to track changes in students' behavior. And the first one that I'm going to discuss is making observations and discussions with students. By observing them in the classroom, outside of the classroom, in the hallways, lunchroom, etc., we can see, the students that they interact with, how they interact, and can notice changes. If a student, always comes in as happy and all of a sudden has his head down on the desk, something's not right. So going up and discussing with that student, hey, why is your head down? What's going on? The student may say, hey, I have a migraine headache, and that's fine for one day, but kind of talking to the student, hey, do you want to go down to the nurse? If it turns into a daily occurrence of every day he has a homework or has a headache, maybe I need to communicate with parents. Maybe I need to talk with the student more to see what the problem is. So I think observations and discussions is the first step. The second step I would take are what are called anecdotal records. Now, an anecdotal record is a short summary of an observation. So an anecdotal record needs to be factual and objective. You can't put any opinions or personal feelings or judgments to that. I have an example on my PowerPoint. You can see in my example I have the date there, I have a time, what class it is. This might be for maybe high school. I have like science class. You can see through the documentation I have that it's very non-judgmental, non-opinionated, just kind of states what was seen during that incident. Those records can be kept in a notebook or on your computer. I usually jot them down in a notebook, but you can set them aside and, refer back to them if an incident continues. So those are extremely important. The third type of tracking I would do would be frequency. If you have a behavior that happens constantly and seems to be, something that you have happening all the time, then you can do what I would call frequency records. A frequency record, generally for that, what you're going to do is actually tally the number of times a behavior happens during a set amount of time. So I will look at, on my example, I have Sue Smith, and I'm looking for the frequency of how often she does name calling. So she's calling names to different students and making fun of them. So on October 19th of 2023, I put the wrong year, but that's okay. You can see I put tally marks for the day. Each time she makes basically a name calling gesture, I put a tally mark. So you can see on the 19th, we have 8 total tallies. So she did it 8 times. By looking at a group of data for a full week, you can see, on the 22nd, she has, a total of, I believe it's 10. So that has the most. And I can kind of look at why was that a heavy day? Why did she have more this day or less that day? It kind of lets me know if that is a real problem. The fourth type of tracking you can do is an interval record. Now, an interval record is taking a selected behavior and you record it during the time, and what you're going to do is you're going to set specific time amounts. So for this example I have on my PowerPoint, I have 15-minute increments. So from 9 to 9:15, 9:15 to 9:30, 9:30 to 9:45, etc. Basically what I'm going to do every 15 minutes is I'm going to say, did the behavior happen? So on the second, you can see at 9 to 9:15, I looked at the behavior and I say, okay, Joe Brown, did he physically hurt someone? And I kind of define what physically hurting is. If he did, I'm going to put a plus sign. If he did not hurt somebody during that time period, I put a minus. So on the second at 9 to 9:15, he did not hurt anyone, so I'm going to put a minus sign. And then you can see on the third, from 9 to 9:15, he did hurt someone, so I put a plus. So I can kind of look at a full week and decide, oh, I noticed from 9:45 to 10 a.m., there's solid pluses. Boy, every single, that time frame, this always seems to be happening. He seems to be physically hurting someone. So that's something I can mark. Where I can also look at 9:15 to 9:45, it's kind of sporadic. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. So that way I can kind of decide whether or not I need to change maybe the activities, what's causing this, and looking at that as well. And the last one I'm going to talk about is school records. So the fifth way to track would be looking at school records. So that would be things like attendance, grades, discipline. And if I notice changes in them, so if I notice attendance, every Friday, Bill's not at school or Susan's not showing up on Mondays. Or even in high school, if you have specific classes, he's not showing up for science class every day, but he's here for all the other classes. Maybe something's happening in science. So that's something to look at. Grade fluctuation. If he's going from A's to F's or F's to A's, what's going on? Discipline is another area of focus. If I notice similarities in discipline, he's being sent to the office for this issue or that issue, that's something I can address as well, and seeing if that's being a problem as far as, bullying of some type.
Lisa Wilcrout, thank you so much for your response. You bring so much professionalism to this podcast, and it is relentless. It is relentless how you answer these questions. You gave us scenarios. You gave us scenarios on how to track and keep record of behaviors and changes in behaviors with these students, right? Based on the characteristics that emerge or that they show or that they display, right? But that only comes about by having a relationship. And I like the way you covered each topic, because some people, some court people would say, and we have mediators on this panel, but some court people would say, as far as it relates to law, that, okay, are you violating the Privacy Act, right, by tracking this information? But no, you're not, because these are standard tools in the education system that is implemented with progress reports, behavior reports. So it's totally legal what you're doing, and that's something that we're going to really, really have to hone in on, I believe, moving forward into the digital age, right? So I like the way you help deter what some researchers are calling now bullycide. And bullycide is basically when a kid is bullied so much, cyberbullied so much, that they actually do the most unimaginable thing, and that's take their own life. And so these are some of the toolkits that the panelists tonight are using to deter bullycide. Okay, and that's going to be, unfortunately, a word that we're probably going to hear a term we're probably going to hear a lot of moving forward, especially with virtual classrooms, especially with more social media platforms, right? But it's happening, it's true. All you have to do is Google it. All you have to do is look it up, and you will see for yourself. So, Lisa, we appreciate you for the response.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Next we have, and you guys know this guy, he's been on the podcast many times, and that is Rick Beaule. Mr. Beaule, please say hello to the people.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Rick Beaule, Bachelor's of Science in Music Education, Masters of Science in Educational Leadership and Administration from Duquesne University, a 17-year teaching veteran in Pennsylvania and Texas, serving as president of Clean Educators Association in Region 10 of the Texas State Teachers Association, representing over 3,500 educators across Central Texas. Currently, he's teaching elementary music in the Clean Independent School District near Fort Hood, Texas. Rick, we pulled you back on the podcast because of your expertise in the field of education, your knowledge as it relates to public safety. A lot of people are pulling on you now for different news stations, newspapers, because of your experience and because of your stick-to-itiveness as it relates to the education system as a whole. And then also you are the president of a major, the largest teachers union in the world. So we're so pleased to have you here tonight. How are you and your staff members connecting this new knowledge with previous knowledge to expand public safety in education? And what I mean by expand, I mean to enhance, to make better public safety in education.
Well, thank you. Again, first of all, thanks for having me on. I want to, before I answer your question, I want to clarify a couple of things. I am president of a local and a region in the Texas State Teachers Association. Our parent organization is the National Education Association that does have over 3 million educators around the country and even more around the world when you factor that in. So I just felt the need to, make sure that was squared away. So with that said, in terms of expanding public safety in education, it's a difficult subject to address because it covers a lot of things. We're not just talking about students harassing students, right? Because they're not the only ones that are impacted by cyberbullying. I had a member last year who called me being harassed and threatened online by students who did not like the policies that she had in place for lab work and the grades that she gave as a result of them not following those policies that she laid out clearly in her syllabus at the beginning of the year, reminded them of that, referred them to it, and they didn't like it. And so they started posting things online, including memes of things with guns and talking about, potential violence and wanting to do a throwdown. So when I started looking into this, I was astonished by the fact that when I looked, there were no provisions in either the local board policy in our district or the state education code with regards to students bullying educators. There are lots of provisions about students bullying students, as I said, and educators bullying students, but there was nothing in there that protected educators from student bullying. So the first thing I did was work to get a resolution passed last year in the Texas State Teachers Association House of Delegates to support protections for educators against bullying. And that allowed TSTA to back and then help push for a bill that conveniently happened to be moving through the Texas legislature last session that helped provide some codification against cyberbullying from students against educators. And eventually that did pass, and that was signed into law, so I was pleased with that. So in providing that legal framework to help prevent bullying is an important component because we need to understand that the law, as it applies to the cyber world, is typically more than a little vague because it's kind of a free zone. There's not a whole lot of regulation that occurs with it. And as a result, when you get things like cyberbullying, districts are kind of limited as to what they can do to prevent and deal with it because the bullying itself doesn't take place on school property, and most education law is pretty clear in saying that it needs to take place on school property in order for the districts to have jurisdiction. So that makes it a lot more complicated in terms of dealing with the bullies when they operate online. When it comes to how information and knowledge about cyberbullying is transmitted, in many cases, there's not a whole lot of change at this point as to what's been happening because multimedia sources have been in use for transmitting information for quite some time. Things like PowerPoints, instructional videos, they have been transmitted via email or a web link for years. Some of the new things that are coming out are interactive videos with quizzes that are inserted into them to help provide feedback and assessment of knowledge. And I anticipate seeing more of that coming, especially in the near future as we continue to adjust during the time of COVID. But the other limitations of a digital learning environment still apply in terms of equity of access and how you identify those things. I suspect that on some levels there are going to be a few trainings that will start coming out in the next few months that focus on identifying situations where potential bullying is occurring. We're already seeing some of that in terms of the social-emotional learning, or SEL, and trauma-informed schools, right, where we're trying to do that, restorative discipline, things like that, where we're trying to bring these things out into the open. But we still have to deal with getting these important bits of information to the people that need to hear it, right? And there's one thing I'm excited about that I've been looking into, that's a concept called a text-based course. And a text-based program is where small sections of information on a subject are sent via text message over a period of days, or SMS or MMS, if you would, multimedia sense. Given that most folks nowadays at least have cellular communication in some form that involves texting, that text format can go a long way to help eliminate some of those access inequities. Excuse me. That format, though, it still allows for assessment and exploration through links. It also provides kind of a break and a different from the inevitable stream of Zoom meetings. I'm beginning to call myself a Zombie. But it also allows for the processing of information and the chunking of information in a manner that doesn't require a large block of committed time. I'm actually in the final stages of preparing the first module of a new text program, a new text course for the campus representatives in my local. And I'm excited about it. I think it's going to work really, really well. And I'm hoping that we're starting something new that can really help address some of the barriers that people have in terms of distance learning, especially when you're dealing with cyberbullying like this. People need to be able to understand the information and know what to do. So getting that information to them in a form that they can access and that they can process becomes really, really important. And it's going to take new ideas and new initiatives like this to overcome those barriers when it comes to distance learning. But it's something that we need to do, and I'm excited to hopefully try to find a way to make that happen.
Powerful. And again, Rick's talking about bullying here. You've been talking about bullying and how, for me, how I analyze what you said, bullying has entered into the digital age, right? But really, can't really prove it. There's really no grounds. Laws are still being developed, right, to support everything, to prove, where it came from, because you can't really prove who started the bullying on the cyber net, right? And so these impulses behind it are the same as the traditional bullying, but these effects are now magnified. They're magnified because they go to a wider spectrum, right? And so, Rick, I like the way I like what you've been doing in the community to support public safety, and it's not easy. Like you said, it's very diverse. It's nothing simple about it, but it's a work in progress. It's not perfect, but you got lawmakers out there, you got policymakers out there. They are working around the clock. They really are, though you don't see it, but they're working around the clock, and it's so good to know that you're rubbing elbows with these guys and girls, Rick, and thank you for the response. And because you made that response the way you did, and because people are listening, and some people are probably a little ticked off because they're like, well, they're not telling us how to charge somebody for harassment, right? And because, I think the best way for us to get a better view on this topic is for someone to share a personal story about cyberbullying that they've experienced. Who would like to share a story?
There have been a couple of cases where I have dealt with some very abusive people online. I've had cases where people have sent anonymous emails with some very, very nasty things. And when it comes to doing that, it's obviously easier for me as an adult to handle this. But when I look at it from a child's perspective, or if I look at it from a parent's perspective, in terms of what, if it's happening to their child, to me, that's kind of more the important factor than what happens to, what has happened to me personally. And the thing to understand is that when you have a child in the schools that is being cyberbullied, or if you have an educator that is being cyberbullied, the key to this, as with so many other things, is communication. Because from a legal standpoint, the district may not be able to do as much in terms of discipline or legal action, but what they can do is help coordinate with the local enforcement offices, the police departments, and they can work on addressing the legal end of that. The other prong, the other point of that does involve the district, and that would involve getting the counselors involved, because you still have a situation of where the child is still in the environment where the bully is also operating. So to say that it is only happening online would kind of be a misnomer. It's really happening in the environment, within the physical environment as well, is what I'm getting. So you need to make sure that you are also coordinating things with the counselors and the various anti-bullying programs on the schools and on the campuses. And the other thing to bear in mind is that it takes communication, it takes patience, and it takes persistence, because you are dealing with an individual, and when I'm speaking of the bully when I say that, who, unless they are given a pretty substantial reason to not behave in that fashion, likely is going to see no reason to stop. So it is something that takes an effort, and it is something that is very difficult, because you're dealing with someone who doesn't want to stop doing that behavior because they're not being negatively impacted by it. So that's part of the challenge that you have when you deal with that. And I love the listing of the things that Lisa mentioned earlier, in terms of those outlets and those opportunities and the ways to document for teachers and educators, because those things are important in providing that information to investigators, not only on the campus or in the district area, but also in the local community, right? Because documentation and evidence and observation is important. And it's important that educators be aware of these things that are happening, and that they are documenting these things that are happening, so that when the time comes, there is a trail of information that can be used to persuade either the students and or the parents, who sometimes think, well, my child's not doing that. That's not what they do, right? But they are. And so it's important to have that documentation so that it doesn't turn into one person's word against another. So having that and understanding the fact that it's not just one thing, right? It's not just the police. It's not just the district administration. It takes a coordinated effort on everybody's part to be able to handle that. And that's part of the reason why, especially with the lack of regulation on the internet, why cyberbullying is a difficult thing to deal with, because they're operating in an area where it is more difficult to hold them accountable for the actions that they do. So that requires extra work, extra documentation, extra detail, and extra diligence. I guess I'm favoring the letter D today. But it's important to do those, to take those into consideration, and for parents to be persistent, because it's their children, and we don't want any more bully sides if we can possibly avoid them.
Thank you, Mr. Beaule. Exactly. We do not need any more bully side victims, because we've had enough, and the pain that happens affects the whole school and the whole school district. Any more stories that any of the panelists would like to share? Go ahead, I'm listening.
One of the things to expand on what Rick said was, number one, the old dynamic was separate the bully from the victim. How do you do that in a digital environment? How do you prevent cyberbullying when there's no direct connection? Number one, we have to still go back to the tried and true understanding that bullies operate in the dark. They have to operate in the dark. They cannot stand the light of day. So the number one way to defend yourself against cyberbullying is to use that forward key in your emails, in your social media. Share it. Forward it to someone who really has a position of being an outsider, who has an interest in stopping bullying. Every school can create a dynamic where if a child believes they're being cyberbullied, they could forward the information to some type of a mailbox or Dropbox, and the administration or the school counselor or somebody could take a look at it non-judgmentally, but we don't deny that the bullying is taking place. Number one, teachers deny the bullying is taking place, or they say, you just got to deal with it. You know what? We don't have to deal with it. These children do not have to deal with it. They're not adults. They need an outlet that they trust, and they need to see follow through. When they forward something to that Dropbox, the bully needs to be addressed in some way, shape, or form, and that creates fear in the bully. And once you do that, without any violence or without any other interaction between the bully and the victim, now we have a tool that allows a voice to be heard and action to be taken.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. You know, let's talk about the types of cyberbullying while we got everybody on the panel here real quick. Because, you know, bullying is gossip, spreading rumors, trying to damage someone's character, right? Or friendships. It's harassment. It's insults, being offensive, like Rick was talking about in his experience that he had received some very, very insulting comments on his social media. And it's also cyber stalking, right? Where people are making threatening messages to intimidate you or threaten you. And then also there is taking someone's picture and deforming the picture to make it look like they're doing something that they never did before. All of those are under the umbrella of cyberbullying. This was another impactful night of the Impact of Education Leadership, episode 46 Panelist tonight, where Buddy Thornton, Lisa Wilcrout, also Rick Beaule. Thank you and good night.
Welcome to the Impact of Educational Leadership podcast with ID3 for Isaiah Drone III. This show was designed to provide an exclusive forum on educational achievement gaps related to learner success while discovering relationships and family issues in a diverse setting.